Good morning. Day 3 of the second season of the Webster show at 9 a.m. precisely. This morning, a key question. When is a picket line not a picket line in the forest industry in British Columbia? Sometimes when it's put up by the PPWC. And believe you me, this set teeth on edge at the I.W.A. convention in Vancouver yesterday, where to Jack Munro, the top man in the I.W.A. in BC, I put, for instance, this simple little question. Jack, you can't get away from the fact that there are still some mystified members in your convention who just can't understand why any unionist would cross any other picket line.
Nobody has said we're going to cross picket lines.
You said you removed their picket lines on specific occasions.
Right, and that's different than
if they
crossing.
tried to use you as a pawn in their game.
That's different, Jack, than crossing a picket line. We will not cross picket lines, but we may remove them.
You can get the blunt diplomatic nuance of that. They won't cross picket lines, but they may remove them. Then they won't be there to cross. That's a continuing problem. But first on the show this morning, we're going to turn to the fascinating case of one Galindo Madrid, who's supposed to be a refugee from the Chilean dictatorship, but who is regarded by certain authoritative people as nothing but a guy who missed his ship, got into some trouble with his skipper, and has put up a phony front as a refugee. He's working in Vancouver in a little bistro as a cook. That's Galindo Madrid. He came into the news, of course, specifically when a man by the name of Svend Robinson, who is the NDP MP for Burnaby, and he's sitting over there in position number 1 for this morning to defend his position, whereby it seems to me, and what I've learned since I came back, he used his office as an NDP MP apparently to flout the law. Now, maybe we can find out for sure this morning whether or not this guy, Galindo Madrid, is a kind of boat person that deserves help, or whether he should be chucked out the country. First this morning, we hope to have Galindo Madrid here too. We're going to turn to Svend Robinson and the case of the so-called phony refugee. Svend Robinson is NDP MP for Burnaby, and I knew the moment he was elected, in fact long before he was elected, that he'd be in the center of a number of political storms. He's that kind of, in the best sense, political activist. Right, Sven?
Well, I've been active for some time, as you know, Jack, and I hope to make sure that I continue to represent my constituents effectively.
Good. Don't forget to mention your constituency.
Burnaby.
Burnaby, right. You're waking up every morning and you say, Burnaby, 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 I must represent my constituents in every possible way.
That's correct, Jack.
I am convinced by Doug Collins, unless you can show me proof to the contrary, that this man, Galindo Madrid, is a phony, that he is not a legitimate political refugee, and that you used your office as an MP without properly investigating the case, and in fact flouted the law of this country by pretending to give him sanctuary from some evil minions of the Mounties or the Immigration Department. Is that correct?
No, I think you're wrong on each and every one of those allegations, Jack.
You're a lawyer, you prove me. You're on the witness stand now. Make your case.
Well, okay, first of all, when a lawyer has to defend a case, usually he's presented with some reasonable allegations. Doug Collins, and I don't like to get involved with Doug Collins.
Why
because
not?
Traditionally in the past he has unfortunately had a tendency to distort the facts in an attempt to perhaps whip emotions up.
Answer
and
the
that's
question.
Exactly what's happened here.
Doesn't
Jack,
matter.
okay?
I've done that myself on occasion too, but that doesn't stop me being a reporter from time to time.
Now, the facts of the matter are, Jack, I think quite clear. The facts of the matter are that Galindo Madrid was a very active leader of the student movement in Chile before the coup in 1973, in September of 1973.
Did he not serve in the armed forces of Chile?
Well, I'm coming to that, Jack, okay? He was an active student leader. Following the coup, the overthrow, the bloody overthrow of the democratically elected government in Chile, he was arrested and he was tortured.
When did this come out?
This came out, this has been, Doug Collins does not deny that he was tortured.
What documents do you have to show that he is a refugee?
Well, Jack, if you'll let me continue, okay? The first fact of the matter, and it's undisputed by Doug Collins and by every level of appeal body, is that Galindo Madrid was arrested, was tortured, still bears the scars of cigarette butts, and a number of other rather brutal experiences which took place.
Sven,
Now,
you are
following
being
that,
specious.
I'm not being specious.
I asked you for facts. How many bodies have examined his case as a refugee, and how many bodies have said he is not a political refugee?
Well, now you've changed the question, Jack.
No,
Okay,
I
you've
haven't.
asked me if I have evidence to prove that he's a refugee.
But you're only
okay?
going to give me a lot of political propaganda unless
This
I
isn't
pin
political
you down.
propaganda. The fact of the matter is that he was a student leader, he was arrested, he was tortured, he was drafted into the Chilean army, he was required to serve at a concentration camp in Chile, cleaning up evidence of executions and tortures which took place.
Now will you answer my questions? How many Canadian bodies, faced apparently with this documentation that he talks about, or his claim, have refused him status as a refugee?
There have been a number of bodies which have reviewed the matter. I believe there are something like 5 or 6
Have they refused him
bodies.
status?
To this point in time, he's been refused status as a refugee.
Has the Immigration Appeal Board refused him status?
Incorrectly, yes.
Is it not a fact that that's one of the softest touchies in the country, the Immigration Appeal Board?
No, that's not a fact when we're dealing with refugees.
Has the Advisory Committee on Applicants for Refugee Status in Canada refused him, said he is not a refugee?
Yes, incorrectly they said that, Jack.
Is there another group, a committee called, what's the name of the third committee? If you want to help me, I'll have
There's
to
a
look
group
for
of
it myself.
departmental flacks who've looked at the case, Jack.
The Immigration Department Special Inquiry, did that refuse his status
Yes, it did.
as a refugee?
And I would point out, Jack, that at each and every level but one, contrary to what Doug Collins has said, there was no input whatsoever by either Galindo Madrid or by his lawyers.
Did the federal court, which you'll agree is probably the most libertarian court in Canada, refuse to give an order for a review on his application refused by the appeal board as a refugee?
In a single line decision, they said that the appeal was dismissed. They are not a libertarian body at all.
In other words, it's quite obvious they have not accepted his testimony that he was, 1, an activist, 2, tortured, 3, in some way marked for execution. They have not accepted
No, that
it.
is not correct, Jack. They did accept that, but what they said at the Immigration Appeal Board level was that because he obtained a valid passport, that therefore he must not have been a refugee at the time. They also went on to say,
Very good point.
Well, and an inaccurate point, Jack.
Why inaccurate?
Because the fact of the matter, which they chose to ignore, is that his passport was obtained through clandestine means. He obtained his passport through a travel agency, and as you are probably aware, that corruption in some of those countries is notorious. He obtained his passport through a travel agency, which has since been closed down by the Chilean government, precisely because they've been handing out these passports.
Is it not a fact that he left his ship in Squamish after a trouble with the captain, perhaps because of drinking?
That is an absolute fabrication.
Is it a fact that it was a longshoreman's union after he'd left the ship and didn't get back on again and couldn't get his passport and his pay that advised him that the easy way to get into this mug's country was to say you were a political refugee?
That is not a fact, Jack. As a matter of fact, I see you're referring here to some of Doug Collins'
I
columns.
certainly am.
And Doug Collins himself has admitted that on 3 points, the question of whether Madrid was drunk, which Madrid denies categorically, the question of whether he approached the Chilean consulate, which Madrid denies categorically, that material he gets directly from guess who? The Chilean consul general himself.
Was the Chilean representative not out at Squamish on that occasion, acting as an intermediary for Galindo Madrid to get his money and his passport back from the captain?
No, he was not, Jack. That statement is
An
completely
official
inaccurate.
of the consulate's office was.
That statement is completely inaccurate, and Madrid denies it completely. There's been no evidence of that whatsoever. We're dealing with a government, Jack, as you may recall, and if you've looked at the news recently, a government which is not afraid through its representatives to tell lies, to murder people. About 2 weeks ago, they stated that the nephew of Allende, who they had previously issued an official statement on as not being in Chile, that statement was now inoperative.
You always have been an excellent political debater. I do not deny that the Chilean government does not have a halo around its head. I'm quite sure there have been abuses and assassinations and torture in the bad old days in that country, and perhaps even today. But it would seem to me that I.W.A. Madrid was 16 when he served in the armed forces, was granted an honourable discharge, got a passport, and police states ain't very generous with passports, got on board the ship, came to Squamish, had a row with the skipper, whether or not he got drunk. The skipper wouldn't have him back on the ship. Is that not the first reason for his landing in this country?
Absolutely not, Jack.
You mean he went on the ship and was thrown out?
Galindo Madrid took the first available opportunity to seek refugee status, and that was when he left the ship in Canada.
How many days after he left the ship did he seek refugee status?
He sought it immediately.
Through you?
Not through me, no.
Through whom?
through his lawyer, Stuart Rush,
At that time.
at that time.
Not immediately, though, after he'd been talked to the Longshore Union at Squamish.
The Longshore Union simply intervened to the extent that they said, let this guy off the boat.
No, let this guy have his passport and his money, is my version,
And let him
according to
off the
my
boat.
sources.
And let him off
He
the
wasn't
boat.
on the boat at the time.
He was back on the boat. Your sources are Collins, and
No,
Collins
not
is
only,
not accurate.
not only Collins. The fact was, though, that the Longshore said, we will not load this boat unless you deal with Galindo Madrid in this way and that. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, Jack.
And it was after that that he claimed to be refugee status.
You've glossed over a few facts again, Jack, which is,
Show me the
which is
facts.
convenient.
Give me
and
the
I want you
facts.
to tell me why we're making such a fuss about this guy when there's no contradiction whatsoever to the fact that he was arrested, he was tortured, we know what kind of government we're dealing with there. He came to Canada
What do you mean he was
at the same
tortured?
time. He was tortured.
Is he coming this morning?
I hope he's coming.
Can he
this
speak
morning.
English?
Well, with an interpreter.
I
okay?
hope he brings an interpreter.
So do I. The fact of the matter is that he was arrested, he was tortured. Amnesty International has documented the conditions that take place there. Now,
Not his conditions. Amnesty International has documented other conditions that take place.
that deal with people who oppose the government, as Madrid did.
How actively did he oppose the government at 16 years
Well,
ago?
actively enough.
Is it not a fact that you could well have been sucked in because of your political bias, naturally enough, against the Chilean government?
No, Jack, that's not the case.
You remember
He
other
was-
celebrated cases where guys have come in here with phony stories. All the do-gooders rush to help, and we find out later that they are totally phony.
Doug Collins has dealt with this case in a completely distorted manner. And I want to ask you a question.
Ask
Jack,
me a
okay?
question.
If we're so concerned about the rights of political refugees and so on that we're opening our doors to 50,000 Vietnamese boat people, what is all the fuss about when we're dealing with one person who's been in Canada for 2 years, who is a political refugee, who's been working in
Who
Canada?
claims to be a political refugee.
Well, 50,000 Vietnamese boat people claim to be political refugees. I'll tell you, Jack, if Galindo Madrid came into our country in tights, doing a little ballet pirouette from the Soviet Union, do you think he'd be treated this way?
That's a different thing.
Oh, it's different. That's a different
I'll
government.
tell you why I'm interested. I'm interested because while I was on my well-deserved long vacation, I heard that an astute young MP by the name of Svend Robinson had called a press conference to announce that he was going to give sanctuary to this refugee. Did you or did you not do that?
I called a press conference.
Did you give him sanctuary in your house?
Well, sanctuary is one word, Jack.
What did you say at the time? That you challenged the Mounties perhaps to dare to arrest him in your house?
I did nothing of the sort.
What did you say?
What I said, Jack, is quite simply this, that Galindo Madrid is in imminent danger of being deported. There was no evidence at that point that, in fact, he was going to be picked up that day or anything.
And so, because he was in
Are
imminent
you
danger
going to
of
let me
being
say it,
deported,
Jack, or are you going to say
I
it?
want you to get to the point.
Well, you don't have to put the words in my mouth. I'm quite capable of
I
doing
was only
that for
repeating
myself.
your words. You'd said that because he was in imminent danger of being deported,
Because he was in imminent danger
You
of being
did what?
deported. What I did to draw attention to the fact was I said that he was welcome into the sanctuary of my home. I violated no law. I threatened the violation of no law, contrary to your statement that I flouted or flaunted, whatever you want to say. I violated no law whatsoever. I drew attention in the manner that I felt was most effective to the hypocrisy of the Canadian government in dealing with this case.
and what did you mean by sanctuary?
Well, sanctuary, what I meant by that was that he was a welcome guest in my home for that period of time.
And what was the implication of that sanctuary?
Well, the implication of the sanctuary was quite simply that, as I say, I was drawing attention to what was taking place.
What was the implication? You know well what I'm talking about, Sven. Please answer the question.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by sanctuary.
By
what the
saying
implication-
that, well, you're not challenging, if there had been a deportation order, or there was at that time some kind of action happening, you were saying, don't you dare arrest him in my house. I am an MP. I am above your administrative procedures.
I am above no laws, Jack, and I'm well aware of that.
Be you never so high, the law is above you.
That is correct.
Did you not clearly leave that impression with British Columbia at large, that if somebody wanted refuge and sanctuary and you approved their case, by coming to your house, the police or nobody else would dare to touch them?
I did not.
Do you blame me for taking that
I did
interpretation
not.
from your actions?
What I said was that in those unusual circumstances, that in order to draw to the attention not only of the government, of the minister who has been so bogged down by his bureaucracy that he may still not know what's going on, and to draw to the attention of the Canadian public what was taking place, instead of Galindo Madrid quietly being picked up, put on the ship and sent back to Chile and being imprisoned and tortured,
And
that
killed,
I spent,
don't forget, killed,
and that I
executed.
I, Svend Robinson, Member of Parliament for Burnaby, was drawing to the attention of the public exactly what was taking place. I violated no law, and I threatened no violation.
Let's see if you'll now answer my question. And it's an interpretive question on which I require an opinion. Do you blame me for taking the interpretation that you were saying to the Mounties in the Immigration Department, don't dare cross my threshold and arrest or deport this man?
I don't blame you for taking that interpretation from the sunny shores of Salt Spring Island.
That's all I wanted to know. Next, we're going to see what Collins said about Sven and Galindo Madrid, and then we'll get back to more interview and then phone calls after this break. There's a complete difference of viewpoint between Svend Robinson, NDP MP for Burnaby, and Jack Webster, because Jack Webster is very cynical about a number of these so-called refugee cases, and he knows perfectly well that the Immigration Appeal Board in this country is so maudlin, do-gooding, and sympathetically stupid that they'll let almost anybody into the country. I could make your hair stand on end with stories about some of their capers in the Immigration Appeal Board.
Well, the Immigration
I've
Appeal
never
Board,
known a case yet where there's been the slightest, what's the word, scintilla of evidence where they haven't said, oh, for God's sake, stay in Canada.
How many cases have you read recently, Jack?
Not read them. I deal with them as they come to my
Okay,
attention.
well, you don't know the statistics at all. Don't give me that nonsense that you know what the Immigration Appeal Board
I know
is
how
doing.
they handle people.
You don't know the statistics at all.
I know who appoints
You
them
may
to the
read
board.
one case in 100, but you don't know about the ones that they deny.
You cannot show me a case where a guy with a shadow of political refugee or danger against him has been thrown out this country.
Jack, that's puffery and you know it.
Yours is puffery.
No.
You'll take anybody who comes to you and says, oh my God, I'm going to be executed by, who is the man in
No.
Chile?
Jack, I see you've got an editorial here from that
Good one.
that upright newspaper, the Toronto Sun.
Very successful.
I would suggest, Jack, that you also have a look at another newspaper,
The Globe and Mail.
The Toronto Globe and Mail.
Yes, yes.
The Toronto Globe and Mail has done a number, well, two editorials in which they've analyzed the Madrid case. They looked at the decision of the Immigration Appeal Board, and they found, quite understandably, that the decision of the Immigration Appeal Board was completely wrong.
I happen to know the do-gooder who writes those editorials on the Globe and Mail.
So the people who write for the Globe and Mail are do-gooders, and the people who write for the Toronto Sun are
In some
paragons
cases,
of virtue.
you know perfectly well if Harry Rankin writes a piece and Collins writes a piece that they're going to take the exact opposite viewpoints on the same set of facts, right?
Well, I just think
Or
you should have
Svend Robinson and Webster for that matter.
you should perhaps have a slightly more objective view of the thing than the Toronto Sun.
The man who acted as interpreter over the pay-in passport for your friend Madrid at Squamish before the longshoreman wouldn't load the boat was the son of the Chilean consul in Vancouver. And I am inclined to accept the fact that he went out there, said there was trouble between this man and the captain, that the captain wouldn't give him his passport and or his money, and it was the pressure by the longshoreman that achieved that much. Now, I don't know whether Madrid was on a 3-day drunk or not. Do you?
Madrid has denied it, and the first evidence that came out of that was from Doug Collins, and I don't believe it.
Let's see what Collins said yesterday. I'll pick out an extract of the program which I think carries the guts of it, and then you can have at Collins and or Webster on what he said. You've seen it already, but we want to refresh the minds of the viewers. Now, without overstating it as in the usual Collins manner, give me the basic clinical facts in the Galindo Madrid case.
The basic clinical facts in the Galindo Madrid case are, A, that the man is a phony. He's no more a refugee than you are. He may have made his situation in Chile a little more awkward than it would have been on account of all the fuss that was caused after his arrival when he was running around claiming that he was a political refugee and damning the government down there, okay? That's one thing. But the other basic fact in the Galindo Madrid case is that once again, we have this horde of do-gooders, professors, all those bums rushing down the street saying, we must save Galindo Madrid. And it's a national movement.
Galindo Madrid jumped ship, is that
He
right?
jumped ship, my understanding, and I was the only, you've got a clipping there
Yeah, I've got it here.
from the Toronto Sun, which says that I am the only one in the country who investigated the case and came up with the answers. Now, the fact is that Galindo Madrid jumped ship in 1977 or whenever it was, now, more than 2 years ago. My understanding, he went on a drunk.
And missed his ship.
No, he didn't miss his ship. He went back to the ship. He had other differences with the captain. The captain wouldn't let him on. And this big political refugee, went to the Chilean consul in Vancouver for help and received help. Now, is that a natural act for a man who's a refugee, a political criminal, in other words?
Who said he was a refugee?
Well, he said he was a refugee after he received advice from people in the Longshoremen's Union. You know what they are politically. I mean, they're pretty close to Moscow, aren't they? Politically, you know. And so they said one way to stay in Canada is to be a political refugee.
Apply for refugee status.
And he applied for refugee status. Now, go on, you want to say something?
No, I was going to say, at some stage, he must have been under some kind of deportation order from the immigration.
Oh, of course. No, he went through the whole... This guy has cost us tens of thousands of dollars. Really, he went through the... First of all, he applied to the immigration department in the normal course of events. You're not a political refugee, they said. Okay, then he had a special inquiry, which means an immigration officer sitting specially and going into the case again. Nothing doing. Then it's appealed. Now, here's a very interesting thing. It went to the Immigration Appeal Board, which is an independent court of record. It is nothing to do...
And a very sympathetic body.
And very... Oh, they're a bunch of do-gooders. You know, I mean, if there's any chance that, you know, you get away with murder there, they'll give you the chance. They're nothing to do with the Immigration Department. And they went into the case thoroughly, lawyers on both sides and so on and so forth. They came out with the verdict that the man was not a political refugee. That press reports, this is a good point too, that press reports stating he was a political refugee did not make him one, okay? Separately from that, there was he went before the Interdepartmental Committee, or his lawyers went before the Interdepartmental Committee in Ottawa, which is composed of some members of the Immigration Department, some members of External Affairs, and various other public persons who were interested in immigration. They said he wasn't a refugee. Then there was the Refugee Committee. It's got a great big long title. I won't bore you with it. But there's a Refugee Committee in Ottawa, which is again independent and has a United Nations Refugee Observer on it. Galindo Madrid is not a political refugee.
Then when he was under deportation or some kind of notice, he hid in somebody, he was given sanctuary?
Well, this silly ass Svend Robinson, you know, the MP, who was interested, in my opinion, mainly in getting his name in the papers and making publicity. Burnaby elected him. God help you, Burnaby. I mean, that's the sort of thing you do when I'm not watching, you know. And so he turns up, you know.
He succeeded. He's going to be on my program tomorrow morning.
Yeah, probably. He'll flannel you, too. But Svend Robinson didn't flannel me when I was on an open line with him. I can tell you that. Because, you know, you've got to be very well informed on this, Jack.
And where is Galindo Madrid now?
He's washing saucers or cups and saucers somewhere in Vancouver. Look, here's what the immigration minister, you know, Atke's a fool, too, the immigration minister. Here it is. It's dated July the 31st. And he states, the immigration minister, should Mr. Madrid fail to leave Canada voluntarily, either to Spain or to another country which is willing to receive him, immigration officials will have no alternative but to give effect to the order of deportation. Still hasn't been done, and I'll bet you it won't be done.
In other words, he'll get a ministerial permit to stay.
No, there'll be some malarkey, and he'll go over the border probably to the United States for 10 minutes and come back.
Reapply.
Yeah.
Want to say anything to Collins right now?
Well, I've been making notes, Jack, and there were so many inaccuracies in
Called you a
his statement.
silly ass?
Well, you know, that's the kind of level that he's dealing at, eh? Name-calling, red-baiting. You know, it's kind of sad to see a man that used to be as...
Red-baiting?
Red-baiting, the Longshoremen's Union, remember? Related to Moscow and so on. It's not necessary to call names. It's not necessary to red-bait.
Hold
You
your
should deal
breath.
with the facts.
I wouldn't dare call you a silly ass. After the break, we'll be joined by Galindo Madrid himself. I've been joined for this segment by BCTV reporter Giselle Portinier, who's going to do the interpreting. Thanks very much, Giselle. And Galindo Madrid. And first, one question in English to Galindo. Galindo, da. Do. How old are you? No. We'll have to do it all interpreting. Would you ask him how old he is, how long he's been in this country, and why he left his ship?
Galindo, ¿cuántos años tienes?
Tengo 23 años.
He's 23 years old.
Right?
¿Desde cuándo estás aquí en el Canadá y por qué dejaste el barco?
Me Dejé el barco en el año 77 y dejé el barco pidiendo asilo político en Canadá por razones, aluciendo razones políticas.
He left the ship in 1977 for political reasons to seek political asylum in Canada.
Was that the real reason he left the ship? Or did he not just have a row with the captain and the captain put him off the ship? Or he didn't show after some time?
¿Quieres saber si es la razón verdadera o si tú te peleaste con el capitán y él te dijo que te tenías que irte del barco?
Es la razón verdadera. Fuimos dos los que nos bajamos en esa vez, dos personas chilenas, y pedimos inmediatamente asilo político desde el primer instante que llegamos a Canadá.
Entonces, ¿no te peleaste
No,
con el
es
capitán?
falso la afirmación que se dice, sobre todo que ese caballero que lo estoy viendo aquí en este diario, afirma que yo peleé con el capitán y no he peleado con el capitán.
He says that he did not fight with the captain did not put him off the boat, that is completely false, and that he left the ship with one other person to seek political asylum in Canada.
Did the son of the Chilean consul in Vancouver go to Squamish and act as an interpreter for him and the other man to get his passport and his money when the ship was docked there?
¿Quieres saber si el hijo del cónsul aquí en Vancouver se fue a Squamish para negociar el pasaporte y ayudarte y ser intérprete allá?
No, es falso.
No, that's not true.
Was there an interpreter from the consulate at Squamish that day? He knows the day I'm talking about.
¿Quieres saber si había un intérprete en Squamish ese día?
Nosotros siempre nos tradujo, fue un compañero que trabajaba en ese puerto portugués y hablaba un poco español y él nos dijo qué pasaba. Pero en ningún instante el hijo del cónsul fue a Squamish a prestarnos ayuda o a negociar todo lo contrario, estaban negociando nuestra ida hacia Chile.
Dices que no había ningún cónsul, ninguna ayuda del cónsul.
No tuvimos ninguna ayuda del hijo del cónsul.
¿Pero de alguna otra persona del
So-
consulado?
No, ninguna miembro del consulado.
No, he says, the only person who ever acted as interpreter was another man on the ship, a Portuguese man who spoke some Spanish. They had no help from the son of the consul or any other person from the consulate.
Now, was it the Longshore Union, after he left the ship, that told him the best way to get into Canada was to say he was a refugee, a political refugee?
¿Quieres saber si la unión de, no sé cómo se dice eso, la unión de personas que trabajan allá, ¿cómo se dice eso?
Los cholos,
¿Cómo?
los portuarios.
Ok. Si ellos te dijeron que tenías que decir que eres un ¿cómo se dice? Refugiado de Chile.
No. Yo cuando me bajo del barco pido asilo político y los compañeros lonchorman son los primeros que ellos me ofrecen su ayuda porque yo tuve muchos problemas con el capitán. El capitán no quería dejarnos bajar del buque, no quería entregarnos nuestras pertenencias y gracias a ellos, gracias a esa unión, nosotros pudimos bajar y pedir y estar abajo en el puerto.
He says that they did not tell him to say he was a refugee. He says that they were the first ones who helped him when he arrived in Canada because the captain refused to allow him and his friend to get off the boat.
Tell him I find it hard to believe. How old was he when he was
Student leader.
was he a student leader, or was he just a young man in the army at 16?
¿Quieres saber que dice primero que no te creo, no sé si puede creer o no? Y quieres saber si tú eres solamente un estudiante cuando tenías 16 años o si tú fuiste ¿cómo se dice? Un capitán de los estudiantes.
Fui un dirigente estudiantil.
Give me in short sentences, go on.
Yes, he was a student leader.
Was he in fact discharged honorably from the army?
¿Quieres saber si tú dejaste el militario con ¿cómo se dice?
Arrancado.
¿Cómo?
Me fui sin avisarle a nadie.
¿Sin qué?
Entré al ejército y después me fui del ejército y y
Pero
salí.
te fuiste del ejército porque tenías que irte o
No.
con...
No fui porque fue la primera oportunidad que tuve para salir de Chile y salí para afuera del extranjero. Pues verdaderamente está corroborado, mis actividades políticas están corroboradas por la agrupación de políticos chilenos que hay acá.
Pero te fuiste porque querías irte del militario o te echaron del militario?
No, porque yo me fui.
He says he left the military on his own accord.
On his own accord. Can he convince me that he is a real political refugee who has, one, been tortured, and two, faces jail or worse if he goes back?
¿Quieres saber si tú le puedes convencer que tú eres un verdadero, ¿cómo se dice? ¿Refugio?
Ya.
¿Se dice eso?
Refugiado político.
Ok, si eres un verdadero refugiado político y si tú te vas a Chile otra vez, te van a meter a un cárcel y torturarte y todo eso.
Ya, en primer lugar,
Give me this in short sentences, Ralph. Tell him to tell his story and you give it me sentence at a time.
Okay,
en primer lugar, lo principal, que la Junta Militar Fascista chilena ha puesto en mi pasaporte una L. Y la L significa, por las Naciones Unidas, Amnistía Internacional, significa que si yo regreso a Chile, estoy condenado a prisión o posiblemente a la muerte.
Okay, dímelo otra vez. I'm having a little bit of a problem.
La Junta Militar chilena es una Junta Militar fascista.
Sí.
Ha puesto una L en el pasaporte mío.
Ellos
Una L,
tienen...
una L,
Ah, ok.
que significa...
Okay, he says the junta is a fascist junta, and they have put an L on his passport, and an L means that if he returns, he will be put in jail or worse, put to death.
Let me stop. Why would they be so stupid as to put a mark on a passport of somebody they wanted back in the country?
Well, Jack, this
I mean,
is...
they must be awful stupid in the fascist junta of Chile.
They may be stupid, Jack, but the fact of the matter is that this is something that I specifically checked out with the United Nations representatives in Ottawa when I was there. This whole question of the L designation, eh? And what they informed me, Mr. Terrion, who's the representative in Canada, was that the L designation is something which is used by the Chilean authorities as a means, essentially, of branding those people who are considered to be
Persona
undesirable.
non grata.
Persona non grata, exactly. Now,
Was he tortured?
Que si fuiste torturado.
Sí, por 4 días.
Yes, for 4 days.
How old was he then?
¿Cuántos años tenías?
17 años.
17.
I hate to ask this question, has he any independent proof other than his own word?
¿Quieres saber si tú puedes probar eso con alguna otra cosa que las palabras y lo que dices?
En mi marca todavía me quedan 2 marcas.
He says he has 2 scars.
Tell him thank him very much. Let's stay there.
Muchas gracias.
But
Y que te
especially-
dejes aquí un poquito.
Thank you very much, Giselle Portinier, BCTV reporter. And don't go away, any of you, after this break. Galindo Madrid is the man not really under attack, if I can make a little statement. We're bringing in 50,000 boat people refugees, and we're committed to it, and we're going to do it. Most people are against it, but that's beside the point. You've got to show some compassion and humanitarianism. I don't mind if Galindo Madrid stays in this country, if I can be bold enough to say so. I just don't want to be conned, Sven, by a phony, and I'm not saying he's a phony, but by a doubtful story of refugee status. But what put me on it, of course, was you sticking your nose in and suggesting you can give people sanctuary, which you can't.
well, I'm well aware of the fact that there is no such thing as formal sanctuary, Jack. I think I succeeded in what I was attempting
Oh,
to do.
yes,
and,
you are an expert in drawing attention to your causes.
Well,
And for that, I give you full marks, and it is part of your job. Now, I had a couple of simple questions for Galindo, which have escaped me. What were they? Oh, yes. How many hearings has he appeared in front of altogether, if you can count them? And
In
name them?
Canada.
Hearings in Canada.
¿Cuántas veces tuviste irte a alguna...
4 veces.
4 veces? Okay.
4 veces.
Cuatro veces?
4 times.
4 times. Special inquiry officer would be 5 times, right?
that's including the special inquiry.
Go through them in English.
I guess there would be the special inquiry.
There'd be the
office.
application, the initial application to the Immigration Department. And then there'd be the Special Inquiry Officer. Then there'd be
Then there'd be the Immigration Appeal Board.
my friends in the Immigration Appeal
Your
Board.
friends in the Immigration Appeal Board.
In which I agree with Collins that they're a bunch of do-gooders.
Okay, and then following that, there was an appeal, but of course he wouldn't actually appear.
that the
at
review
appeal. No, that was he didn't appear. This is one of the problems. He
Federal
didn't appear.
Court.
Federal Court, he didn't appear. He was his lawyer representative.
Review Board.
Review Board, he didn't appear.
United Nations caper.
Did not appear.
Did the Immigration Department always give him, when he did appear, good interpreters?
Siempre cuando tú tuviste que ir, ¿te dieron un intérprete que podía hablar contigo?
Solamente una sola vez pusieron un intérprete de inmigración. Una sola vez.
One time only did they give him an interpreter.
Did he appear without an interpreter sometimes?
¿Te fuiste sin alguna persona que podía interpretar por ti?
Muchas veces se hacía un hearing y yo no hablaba.
Pero tú fuiste allá.
Sí.
He went and he couldn't understand or say anything.
What is his status as of this moment? Under a deportation notice?
He's under a deportation order, but the order has not yet been executed, Jack. So he is legally in Canada, his work visa has been renewed, and he's continuing to wash dishes.
How much does he get paid washing dishes?
¿Cuánto te están pagando?
Gano casi $300 quincenal. Cada 15 días.
$300 every 15 days, every 2 weeks.
Not bad.
You know, minimum wage.
Still single? Is he still single?
¿No estás casado todavía?
Still
Yes,
single.
still single.
I must say one of the more amusing aspects of this whole thing, Jack, is a number of young women who have phoned and offered to marry Galindo Madrid if that will assist him in remaining in Canada.
Well, why not? That's a good traditional way of avoiding Canadian law and has been done by many groups, as you well know.
Well, Mr. Madrid has graciously declined these offers, Jack.
Let's see. I'm glad of that. I think it's better for Mr. Madrid if he keeps away from associations like that. I'm going to go to the phones. Where'll I go? Go ahead, please.
Oh, Jack, I was just wondering how clever the Chilean consul is, because he knows that if a refugee is brought near the embassy of his state and asks for his passport, or to renew a passport, he is not qualified to be called a refugee. It is interesting that the Chilean consul says that Mr. Madrid tried to get his passport through the Chilean consul's
I know. I
son.
tried to get it from the captain of the ship.
Oh, but you said the Chilean consul's son said that he...
Went there and acted as interpreter, and Galindo Madrid says no.
Yeah, but you see,
And that's a conflict, in fact. There's no point in pursuing it. Go ahead, please.
I'd like to say that I agree with Mr. Robinson, and I think he's doing a super job, and that I feel any man who does not want to return to his own country must be scared. And good for you, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice people support you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think you're right on with this one, Webster. I'm just wondering if he's been here 2 years, why he can't speak English, if he seems to be interested in staying in the country.
Oh, let me answer that. Galindo can speak a little English, but speaking English over a beer or over a coffee is vastly different from asking complex questions with me shouting at him. I give him full marks, and that's why we use the interpreter. Fair enough?
Sure.
Fair enough? Fair enough. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Madrid says he was a student leader. How old was he when he was taken into the army? He said he was about 16, wasn't he?
Translate, please.
¿Cuántos años tenías cuando te fuiste al militario?
Con 20 años.
20 years old when you went to the army.
He was a student leader at, I understood he was drafted at 16.
So did I.
That was what
When
Mr.
you-
Robinson said.
When you first went into the Army, how old were you?
Cuando te fuiste al militario la primera vez, ¿cuántos años tenías?
Tenía como 21 años.
20, Venturi.
20 or 21, he said.
20 or 21. That's one of your facts wrong, right? What did he do as a student activist leader that caused him to be
Go
talked
to
to?
what position did he hold? What organization was
Yeah.
he with?
What organization was he with?
As a student leader. ¿Con qué organización estuviste tú cuando fuiste un dirigente de los estudiantes?
Con la izquierda cristiana.
With the Christian leftists.
The Christian leftists. Anyway, you don't accept his story, Hollis Bolus caller, I gather.
I don't. And one other point, as a lawyer, I question, Svend Robinson said that on many occasions, Madrid didn't appear in the courts, and as if there was a denial of justice. I asked Mr. Robinson, is it not correct that when you're before the federal court, it's in the nature of an appeal, and generally lawyers appear and clients rarely appear except as spectators? Isn't that correct?
Well, I indicated, in fact, that his lawyer appeared. What I did say, if you were listening, sir, was that before the various appeal bodies, such as the Refugee Status Advisory Committee, the Interdepartmental Committee, he was not represented.
Do you agree with me, caller, lawyer as you seem to be, that we might as well let him in as long as we're not conned into believing he's in danger?
I can't see it. The other thing that concerns me is Mr. Robinson used the word sanctuary, which is an internationally accepted word meaning a place of safety, yet he recognizes that his house isn't legally sanctuary. I would say that if he's interested in stopping the evil RCMP deportation and serving his, whether this man's his client or his tool, whatever it is, the best way to do it is not to center him out and lead him astray by using a word which would make either Mr. Robinson or Mr. Madrid or the gullible think that indeed Mr. Robinson's house is a place of safety. What he in fact did with the man is announce to the world, if you want him, here's where you get him. The sensible thing would be to put him almost anywhere else, and surely there are enough hotel rooms, enough of these ladies who would be willing to marry him that if they really were worried about his safety rather than using him as a tool of publicity, they could have hidden him and said, as a lawyer often will, I will surrender my client
on such and such.
On terms, rather than here he is.
You've made a good point, and you would agree his point is well taken, and you made a political boo-boo.
No, not at all, Jack. The caller has just admitted that obviously I didn't break any law at all, as he said that...
Say that because...
I got a phone call from a guy in the BC Pen yesterday who said, I hope to break out soon. Can you get me sanctuary in Robinson's house? And I said, no way.
Oh, baloney, Jack.
That was a joke.
We're under a deportation order, and Mr. Robinson was purporting to interfere with the carrying out of that order by interposing himself between the police and...
I agree with you. That's the point I take. And Mr. Robinson did not blame me for accepting that implication from his basic actions. Did you, sir?
No, I did not.
Thank you. One more short segment with Galindo Madrid, Giselle Portinier, and, of course, Svend Robinson after this break. I presume Svend Robinson, NDP MP, not the lawyer, but representing Galindo Madrid, that you're dropping the legal channels and just going for broke with the minister to get a special permit for him to stay here.
I've met with the minister, Jack.
And asked for a special permit.
Asked for a special permit, that's
You'll
correct.
get one, I'm sure.
I hope so.
Couldn't do any damage to the country.
That's correct.
But you overplayed your hand politically. Probably made a lot of enemies.
Well, Jack, in this business, you know, you make some enemies and you make some friends if you take a stand on anything.
Yeah, see, what I object is the fact that because of Galindo and his problems, you immediately launch into your whole lefty thing on a landy.
It's important that the people of Canada be aware...
From the specious to the specific.
Jack, it's important that people of Canada be aware of exactly what's happening in that country. As a matter of fact, this week there is a boycott sponsored by the CLC.
Forget that. Let me ask you a question. I suspect you do not support the entry of the type of people who are coming as boat persons. Is that correct? You do not support the entry of the type of person coming as boat persons.
What I am concerned about, Jack, is the hypocrisy that the government is displaying in this case, okay?
I asked you a question about the boat people. Yes. I feel that with your background, you will say, I don't want these free enterprise, rip-off people whom Vietnam is throwing out into this country. Is that not your attitude?
I'm not particularly excited about the kind of people that are being taken into this country. General Quang, of course, is the classic example of a fellow who was a crook, a drug peddler, etc. And if we can take people like him on special ministerial permits, what on earth are we doing trying to send Galindo Madrid back to Chile?
Don't you secretly regard all the people, the boat people, as Quang offspring?
What I secretly regard the boat people as will remain a secret, Jack.
It's most unusual for you not to give a frank answer to a straightforward question. You see, the point I'm making is it depends on the political complexion of the refugee before you'll come out of your corner.
Well, of course it doesn't, Jack. If you'd bothered to ask me, I would have told you that I'm trying to assist a fellow right now from the Soviet Union who's having problems as a political prisoner as well.
Helped anybody from Rhodesia lately?
As a matter of fact, I have, Jack.
Because they can't get into this country.
Matter of fact, I have.
Even if they're little old ladies and their last legs with $1 million.
As a matter of fact,
they can't get into this country.
If you'd like the details, I'd be happy to give them to you, Jack.
Phones, I said. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, good morning.
Morning.
I'd like to bring up a point that kind of went through a little fast there. The passport through the travel agent, and it came out with an L on it. Now, does this mean that
No,
the...
stop. Where was the L was put on where?
The L was put on by the Chileans here in Canada when they got his passport.
Ah, okay, fine. Now, that clears that little point up. Now, I've been in the nautical business for many, many years, 37 years, I've been working on the Vancouver waterfront for some 24, 25 years. I'm a master mariner. And I've been at sea for some 10 years, and I've seen many, many cases, there's oodles of them, where people get drunk and one thing and another, and they miss ships, and they could be, let's say, Norwegians.
Yeah,
or they...
fair enough. What's your point?
My point is that we don't have any trouble sending those people back. Now, I can understand that this fellow has a problem going back now at this moment, and I wouldn't want to see him sent back.
Because of the political fuss made by Svend Robinson.
Exactly. I don't...
You may have put the mark on him.
I did no such thing, Jack, and you know that.
Not the L mark, another mark.
No. If I have assisted Galindo Madrid to remain in Canada, I'm pleased that
You
that's
can
been
sleep
the
at
case.
nights. Well, if I jumped ship, I'd say I was a political refugee too, wouldn't you?
Well, and I trust you'd come to me, wouldn't you?
No, I wouldn't come to you. I'd do it myself. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, Jack. That fellow had just asked the same question I was going to ask where the L was.
Oh, we told you about it. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
I just want to thank Mr. Robinson for his stand on human rights issue here. I myself a Canadian who've been tortured by the secret police in the southern countries down there, and I've been sentenced to a crime which I never committed, and I know how these people...
Is your first name Bobby?
Beg pardon?
Is your name Bobby?
No, my name is Fred Ostrikov, and I've been tortured by the secret police there in Mexico, and I'm quite familiar with the
I'll tell you what you do.
ways they...
You give Sven a call off there, and maybe, and I'm not being unsympathetic, but my time is up. Maybe he can get some information from you. My thanks, first of all, to Giselle Portenier. You pronounce it for me.
Giselle Portenier.
I did it right. Of BCTV for an excellent job of interpreting, without which the program would have been very difficult. To Galindo Madrid, I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
And I'm not shaking hands with you,
Jack?
Svend Robinson. I don't accept all of it, but you might as well let him into the country now. He seems a decent enough guy, and he's so marked that it would now be dangerous to send him back to Chile. My thanks to each and every one of you. Next, I'm going to deal with a very rough and tough topic with Jack Munro of the I.W.A. And when is a picket line not a picket line? And which picket lines will the I.W.A. remove? They won't cross them, but will they remove them? Munro and I have a good barney on this after this break. Walked into the I.W.A. convention on the Holiday Inn Harborside in Vancouver, and it was just like, call them the good old days or the bad old days. They were ranting and raving at each other on the problem of picketing. And there was Sid Thompson being described as a senile sidekick of Jack Munro, the president of the I.W.A. in British Columbia. Mr. Munro, it was just like the good old days, as I said, but underneath the backbiting that went on in the convention, I suspect that your union is going to have a repeat of the troubles you had this past year with a body you obviously do not like, nor does Sid Thompson, called the PPWC, who, when they were not in strike, picketed your operations in Vancouver and other places purely to embarrass you. And your union took action today in passing a resolution which an old-time labor leader would say was contrary to the solidarity of the working classes. Do you plead guilty to that?
Absolutely not, Jack. The resolution that we passed today says that if the sanctity of the picket line is going to be maintained in British Columbia, then picket lines have to have some responsibility and cannot be established willy-nilly by some dissident group to put people of another union out of work when that other union is not on strike.
Surely if any trade union sets up a picket line outside any of your operations, you are morally bound to respect that picket line.
Jack, we're not talking about crossing picket lines, but we're talking about what is or what is not a legitimate picket line. And some people were upset that I said that we were going to remove their picket line, that Sid Thompson said he was going to remove their picket line. We were right. That picket line had absolutely no business in being in front of our operations, and if the trade union movement does not correct or comply with our picketing policy, then the government sure as hell is going to take our rights to picket away. And
let me make that quite clear. During this summer, when the I.W.A. was balloting on your own settlement, correct?
Right.
You were faced with picket lines from another union.
Right.
What was that other union?
Well, the other union was not the people responsible for the picket line, but the Harmac local of the PPWC were responsible for the picket line, picketing our operations while their union continued to work. They continued to work 2 blocks down the street.
Let's be quite specific about this. Are you talking PPWC were on strike at Harmac on the island?
They were out of work. They were not working. They were not on strike.
They were laid off?
No, they were
closed down?
They were just not going to work. But their union had not called a strike.
Oh, I see. They had withdrawn their labor without a formal strike.
Yes.
So are you suggesting that they wanted to embarrass you in the middle of your negotiations by picketing as many Macmillan Bloedel operations as they could?
They wanted to use our members because they haven't got enough muscle of their own to use our members to do something more than what we got out of the industry, and that just is not going to happen.
In other words, they were using you as a monkey.
Well, they were using us as pawns.
They had put their picket lines against your operations when you were not in a position to strike yourselves.
We, at that point in time, Jack, had a recommendation of acceptance. The negotiating committee unanimously recommended acceptance of our agreement.
And your men were voting on it.
And our people were trying to vote on it.
Right, now, what's the real nub of the problem here? The I.W.A. is a member of the BC Federation of Labour and the Canadian Labour Congress. The PPWC is not, is it?
The PPWC is not affiliated with anything.
What is the PPWC?
It's a breakaway group from old International Pulp.
It's what we used to call the Canadian Council, or maybe still is the Canadian Council of Unions.
The Canadian Council of Unions is made up of breakaway unions, and the PPWC belong to that.
Do you want to put a political label on the Canadian Council of Unions as exemplified by the PPWC?
No.
Why not? They're not an NDP type union, are they?
Well, I think a lot of their membership are certainly NDPers. A lot of their membership work very hard to elect the NDP. I think some people, particularly in Harmac, have some different objectives in life that doesn't meet with any satisfaction from me as
not like the good old days.
Of politics.
It's not like the good old days, is it, Jack, when we could put labels on people? You're not prepared to put a label on the CCU or the PPWC.
Well, Jack, I think that the label that was put on people who had a different point of view was really overworked in the old days, whether they were good old days or bad old days. But I think it was really overworked, and I don't believe in putting that kind of a label on people because they don't agree with us. What we're saying is those people have to act responsibly.
Question. If there is trouble between the PPWC and Mac and Blow or anybody else next year, is there any way that you might respect their picket lines, or would you repeat the position you and Sid Thompson made today, that if they don't get their picket lines out of the way, you'll remove them one way or another?
Jack, each situation has to be judged on the merits of that situation. We're saying that that picket line, when we were balloting, we're saying that the picket line at Chemainus last week that put 600 or 700 of our people out of work, we're saying that those picket lines are wrong. If those people don't want to work in Harmac, then they just shouldn't go to work in Harmac. But they shouldn't try to put pressure on the company by putting our people out of work.
Or were they successful raiders of your jurisdiction?
No, they are not successful raiders of our jurisdiction, but they don't have the ability to negotiate. They don't know how to negotiate in Harmac.
Why don't you swallow them up in the I.W.A.?
Jack, I would love to take them over. However, the way that operation is run is very difficult. The membership are afraid. I know that they're afraid. I get calls from their membership. I would be most happy to have their operations join with the I.W.A. There would obviously have to be some change in their leadership, in their organization, before we could get along.
Now, you don't like hypothetical questions, but you got to face one for next year. If next year the PPWC has legitimate contract troubles, and they consult you in advance in line with the policy of the federation of which they are not members, would you ever respect their picket lines?
Jack, we did in 1975. 75, we had over 20,000 people out of work because of picket lines from other unions, and we were not on strike.
But in that case, Mr. Barrett, then the Premier of the province came to your rescue with a general back-to-work order, as I recall.
Barrett didn't come to our rescue. The province was in a mess, and some people who should know better didn't know better. Supermarkets were shut down, the pulp industry was shut down, the pulp industry had shut our people down, and we were not ordered back to work by legislation. We negotiated an agreement after sitting in Victoria for 6 weeks, waiting for pulp to negotiate an agreement. They didn't have the ability to negotiate. When that legislation came in, there was a 48-hour period before it became effective. We negotiated an agreement in that 48-hour period, which was acceptable to our membership. More important, it was acceptable to the pulp membership in both the CPU and the PPWC. In 1977, we negotiated the agreement, which was acceptable to CPU and to the PPWC. In 1979, we negotiated the agreement, which was acceptable to all unions. So it's obvious that they rely on us to do the negotiating and then try to use our members through their picketing policies to better an agreement, and that just is not going to happen.
Jack, you can't get away from the fact that there are still some mystified members in your convention who just can't understand why any unionist would cross any other picket line.
Nobody has said we're going to cross picket lines.
You said you removed their picket lines on specific occasions.
Right, and that's different than
crossing. If they tried to use you as a pawn in their game.
That's different, Jack, than crossing a picket line. We will not cross picket lines, but we may remove them. The members on...
say that again, Mr. Jack.
There's a difference between crossing a picket line and removing it. We will not cross picket lines. But what we are saying is that those picket lines have to be legitimate. If they're not legitimate, then we will remove them.
Why would you say that? Are you fearful of social credit taking political advantage of you?
I'm concerned that if the trade union movement doesn't act responsibly on picketing policies, the social credit government will take away some of the rights that we now enjoy.
Some of the rights given to you by the Barrett government.
Some of the rights that we finally got under the Barrett government that we're entitled to as working people.
I'll rephrase my question. Some of the rights for which you successfully fought and won, but which were granted under legislation of the NDP.
Right.
In other words, the right to picket allies of an employer who was struck.
Right.
You haven't straightened out this PPWC thing yet, though. You could have trouble ahead.
Well, Jack, I would hope not. And the purpose of the resolution is to say to the trade union movement that we have got to be responsible in our picketing policies or we're going to lose our rights to picket.
You want to stop future irresponsible picketing, and you want unions to follow the consultative policies of the BC Federation of Labour.
Exactly right, Jack.
In other words, if you're going to face a picket line from the Teamsters or the PPWC or anyone, you want notice and consultation.
Right. Jack, and that seems to me that it's so automatic that I can't understand why we have to fight about it. There is no place in North America that has as much respect for a picket line as we have in British Columbia. We have earned that respect in British Columbia, and we're going to keep it. But if we act irresponsibly or somebody else acts irresponsibly, we're going to lose the sanctity of the picket line.
Well, we'll leave that for the moment and see what happens 2 years from now. Is that right?
The agreement, right?
Or it could happen before that if these orangutans go on a rampage, couldn't it?
It could, but when we sign an agreement, Jack, then it becomes a question of whether it's legal or not. And,
I still see in my brief visit to your convention that there is some resentment about the settlement of the I.W.A. contract. You got what, an average of about more than $2 an hour each year, or for both years of a 2-year contract?
Far better than over the 2-year agreement, Jack. The minimum settlement is 90 cents an hour the first year, 9.5% the second year with a minimum of 90 cents. The average increase on the average is far more than $2 an hour, and I forgot your second point.
Never mind, you're happy with the contract?
Certainly, and so is the membership, Jack. The people that are raising hell at our convention are tradesmen who are saying that, and they happen to get $2.33 an hour out of this agreement. They're saying that that's not enough for them, not because the $2.33 is not enough, but because somebody else got more. And I fail to understand the trade union philosophy in that argument.
You tried to settle for the needy, am I quoting Sid Thompson correctly, not the greedy?
Well, Sid didn't say that, but somebody on the floor said that the settlement was for the needy, not the greedy. I didn't say it, and Sid didn't say it, but somebody on the floor said it.
Mr. Munro, you made a very successful settlement, everyone will agree, with a highly free enterprise competitive export business just recently for 2 years.
Right.
Nod your head?
That's right, we did.
You're very happy.
The membership accepted it, Jack, by secret ballot.
And then you come out and make the most incredible statement. And Dobie of the Sun is pretty accurate. Agreed?
Dobie is one of the better reporters, I agree with that. Being as how you stole Brian away from us.
You mean Coxford?
Coxford, yeah.
Well, Dobie and Coxford are both good reporters.
Right. Except Coxford isn't in the real world anymore. He works for you.
He works for me,
Right.
true enough. Okay. You are now suggesting that there should be legislation requiring forest industry companies using forest management licenses to guarantee a certain number of jobs. Were you serious when you said that?
Jack, I am most serious. There is no other place in the world where a government will give to a free enterpriser our natural resources without some commitments. The iron ore, the nickel ore, the copper, the zinc, the lead, whatever in BC, the trees are given away, and there is not one commitment. And we as citizens, we as workers in BC, should be able to expect from our natural resources some employment.
There's a commitment to pay taxes, follow the law, pay stumpage and royalty, or whatever else they squeeze out of them.
But, Jack, coal. There is no royalty out of coal.
Argue that with Mr. Barrett and Mr. Bennett. We're talking about the forest industry.
There's stumpage, certainly, on
Are you suggesting the forest companies get away lightly with what they use for export of the people's resources?
Well, I think the forest companies, because of the stumpage, probably have to pay more than a lot of other natural resource industries, and they do have to pay stumpage.
But, Mr. Jack, when you say guaranteed jobs on a certain thing, you mean a government takeover of the industry, don't you?
No, I don't, Jack, but I'm saying that the policies of this government or our province should be that they put the wood to the best use, they log what they're supposed to log, and if they don't log it, it be taken away from them and give it to somebody who will log.
Well, didn't the truck loggers prove, you and I did a program on this, truck loggers proved that there's considerable undercutting by the big boys.
Oh, right. Thousands and thousands of feet of wood is undercut.
You would say guarantee X jobs for the period of this forest management license.
Yeah, coupled with the best use, right, and the best use of the wood. There are peeler logs going into pulp mills today in BC, and we have plywood workers being laid off. Now, that does not make sense.
Peeler logs, which should make profitable plywood, are going into pulp.
Right, or lumber, right.
Are you prepared to take part of the management control if you were so consulted on what logs that should go into which?
Jack, we presented a comprehensive brief to the government about plywood, etc. I'm not prepared to be part of management. Everybody has their role in life, and that is not my role in life. My role in life is, at this point in time, working for the I.W.A. For the betterment of our membership.
Perhaps, though, if you can get the NDP re-elected, they might put a contract with the big boys that they must guarantee certain jobs for certain concessions.
Jack, the big boys in this industry will not, they haven't got the courage to say it publicly, but they will say it privately that they were a hell of a lot happier with the NDP than they are with this present government.
I wouldn't dare ask you who said that among the big boys.
All kinds of them, Jack.
The biggest boys?
They're saying it, Jack. They're saying it, but they haven't got the courage to say it publicly because they're afraid of this government. This government in BC and federally is a disaster.
You mean Socrats and Tories?
Yes.
And you want to see the Liberals and the NDP?
No, I don't want to see the Liberals. I want to see the NDP.
One last question. You made a statement on BC TV the other night in which you wept incredible tears for people being cut off unemployment insurance. Do you not believe that unemployment insurance, with a $4.5 billion public subsidy, has become in many cases a rip-off?
Jack, if the previous federal government and the present federal government would develop some policies to put people to work, then we wouldn't have this problem. Our position is that there are jobs. We have natural resources. We have people who can't afford houses. We have people out of work who build houses. And there is so many things that people should be put to work on instead of penalizing the honest worker who wants to go to work. The honest worker who wants to go to work in our country can't find a job.
Let me finish on a cheap shot. Are you,
what do you mean, finish?
Jack Munro, in favor of giving unemployment insurance through the winter to a fisherman who pocketed $50,000 on herring fishing through the summer?
Jack, I am not involved in the fishing industry.
The telephone log yesterday had a couple of items which just fascinated me. One was totally accurate. It said, Collins is the lowest, most ignorant kind of guy that this caller had ever seen. The other one says, listen to this garbage. What's this about Webster dyeing his hair? I think it's disgusting. I thought he had more brains than that. Look closely. No black roots. Hair not dyed. Hair's gone a beautiful gray blonde through the summer. And of course it gets fried every day under these ridiculous television lights. Good morning this morning. Any calls, Linda? Can take a couple. We've got 2 or 3 minutes to play with. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, I just want to clarify a couple of points here. The Labor Central, which the PPWC belongs to, is a Confederation of Canadian Unions, not the Council.
CCU.
Yeah, the other thing is that Jack Munro neglected to point out that there's a different structure between the I.W.A. and the PPWC.
Well, of course there is. What's that got to do with it?
The 9 locals that we've got around the province, that each local is autonomous, and so that we don't require the central office to issue a strike vote before we have a legal strike vote.
In other words, and you're not under the BC Federation of Labour. You are not committed to the BC Federation of Labour 72-hour pre-talk, pre-agreement on putting up picket lines on Allies plants. Is that right?
That's correct.
Well, that's the trouble. You're not committed.
No, we cooperate with as much as possible, and sometimes that's not reciprocal.
Well, that's not what Munro said this morning. Munro said this morning, you don't move them, he won't cross them, he'll move them.
Well, I think that's a disgusting statement for a labor leader to be making. I think the question that he raises is that the government will take away the right to strike, neglects the history of this province and the history of the labor movement.
He's not suggesting they'll take away the right to strike. He's suggesting they'll remove the right to picket allies of those involved in strikes.
That right was won through the strength of the labor movement. It will be retained through the strength of the labor movement.
It was given by the NDP and could be taken away by social credit tomorrow morning.
Well, we'll see what happens in the labor situation if that happens.
I'm not saying one thing or the other. I'm merely telling you what Munro said.
I'm quite aware of what Munro says, and I think the dissension that existed at the I.W.A. convention, which is only just the head of the iceberg within the union itself, because as everybody's well aware,
Fair
delegates...
enough. I saw some of that dissension yesterday. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack Webster.
Morning, ma'am.
Good morning, Jack Munro. 2 Jacks in a row. And I say that what his membership union means is in the fear, and membership cannot live on fear, doubt, and worry in the union.
The union accepted the settlement with a large majority.
Just a minute. Have you heard me?
Yeah, what fear are you talking about?
Saying that we live not fear, but we live on stop, look, listen, Monroe. We don't need fear. We need female organisms.
Here, here, ma'am. We need female organisms.
Organism to mannerism.
We must have female organisms.
To
We've got to have them.
mannerism in
I'll
the
tell
man
Monroe
in the
that
life.
when I see him today.
Is that hallelujah?
A stop, look, listen, and female organisms. Webster. Beginning to feel that we're back at work,
Do I ever?
don't you? Tomorrow, what do you have planned for the morrow?
Well, we have Canada's new External Affairs Minister, Flora MacDonald.
Good.
And Al Blakey, the president of the BC Teachers Federation.
I did that yesterday. That's about this question of sabbaticals and rearrangement of working years. It's a good piece. Tomorrow morning on the Webster Show, 90 minutes of prime time at 9 a.m. precisely.